This is the 415ers podcast, 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network. Evan Giddings along with Marc Grandy. Follow us on social media. I am at eGiddings10. You can find Marc at Marc Grandy, Marc with a C, Grandy with an I. And this is maybe the extension of the conversation as far as Debo is concerned, as far as the offense is concerned, because it looks a lot more, let's call it simplistic or plain compared to where we left the offense at the end of last season in the conference championship. Even though they didn't win, this was a team that was really touted for its complex scheme, and even to some extent, I know Kyle Juszczyk came on Damon Arado last week and said there are still a lot of complicated things going on pre-snap in the huddle, even though the results have been sort of vanilla to this point, especially in the running game. But a lot of people have suggested the absence or, Mike McDaniel not being in the offensive film room anymore for the 49ers, obviously taking over the head coaching job in Miami. As we're recording this podcast, he's currently playing on Thursday night against the Cincinnati Bengals, and right now are 3-0. They're off to a very good start and have looked great offensively. A lot of people have purported that maybe there's something to do about McDaniel absence not being with the 49ers and their offense taking a hit, specifically with Debo Samuel, Marc, and not being able to be there. And, Debo last year was evolutionary in how he was used as a wide back as well as on the outside, 1,300 receiving yards, 400 rushing yards, the 16 plus touchdowns. And he was the best offensive weapon potentially or arguably in football last season. And this year, he's kind of been off to a bit of a slow start after week one against Chicago. And he's had his troubles, as the rest of the offense has, getting going. And I just feel like I don't believe that there's necessarily a correlation right now, but it is interesting to see how high flying the Dolphins are. Now, they have weapons on the outside. They have a semi-capable quarterback to get the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But the Niners have, in my opinion, just as good of a skill group as far as George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Debo Samuel is concerned. So I don't necessarily think it's an absence of McDaniel that is giving the 49ers fits, but I could see how some people would jump to that conclusion.
Well, what was really interesting, and you mentioned Kyle Juszczyk's interview on Damon and Rado. What I found really interesting was Peter King's appearance on Damon and Rado, of course, on 95.7 The Game, a weekly appearance there. And Peter King said, there's a lot of talk of Mike McDaniel perhaps being, a lot of, the, kind of the mad scientist in the background behind Kyle Shanahan. And what he said specifically is that maybe he's more of the, quote, is what he said, Debo Samuel whisperer, as opposed to anything else. He's the guy who would meet with Debo Samuel every week throughout the week and kind of lay out to him, hey, we want to use you this way, X, Y, and Z. We want you to do this. We want you to, make sure you do this in the run game. We're going to try to get you going, between the tackles, on end arounds, whatever the case is. It was kind of Mike McDaniel laying that out for Debo Samuel leading into that week. And what we saw on Sunday night in Denver obviously wasn't the most effective Debo Samuel has ever been on the ground, just over 1 yard a carry. So maybe there's something to that. It's obviously very easy, and it's really easy to say, well, the Dolphins, they're riding high. They're 3-0. They beat Lamar Jackson. They beat Josh Allen. Things could, trickle back towards the mean. And, the Dolphins, who knows how their season is going to go. And Kyle Shanahan and this run game could very well get going. But it is interesting to kind of see how this Niner team is kind of reacting and adjusting without Mike McDaniel, who really before last year, within NFL circles, a lot of people knew Mike McDaniel, but you poll, Niner fans and, kind of casual NFL fans, and, not many of them are going to have any idea who Mike McDaniel is, but now he's one of the biggest young coaching stars of the game has to offer. And everyone's ready to say Kyle Shanahan was never the offensive genius. It was all Mike McDaniel. I'm sure that is very much overreaction, but maybe there is a little bit of something here specifically to the Debo Samuel wrinkle. You consider that along with the fact that teams just aren't surprised by it anymore. The fact that the Niners have been doing it now for almost a whole season. They've adjusted. They're ready for it. You consider those two things, and you can see how maybe the Niners can't quite get Deebo Samuel working in the run game quite as effectively anymore. Now they're going to go back to the drawing board, try to change things up, and see if they can adjust to the adjustment. But right now, it does seem like there's somewhat of an effect that not having Mike McDaniel is, maybe specifically just on that portion of the run game.
Yeah, look, it isn't like they haven't been using Deebo Samuel, but I think we all need to remember that Deebo kind of became that running back wide receiver hybrid primarily after week 8, after they started out 3-5, and after the running backs for the 49ers were bare to none. So he was sort of forced into that situation as much as Mike McDaniel trying to figure out how best to utilize Deebo. I know people have sort of talked about the separation that he can or can't get as a wide receiver. But, taking a look at his first 3 games, 5 receptions each of the past 2 weeks against Denver as well as Seattle. You make the argument, as we talked about off the top of this episode, that he should have had a lot more yards against Denver as well as some more scores. There's an opportunity in the red zone against Chicago in week 1 early on in that game in which he fumbles, may have had a chance to do some more damage there. So there's been a little bit of him shooting himself in the foot, as well as his quarterback maybe not being able to deliver the ball to him when he is open. But he's gotten his touches. I think you are onto something as far as the lack of surprise when it comes to Deebo Samuel. And that's kind of what I'm interested in to see on Monday night against the Los Angeles Rams, because look, if the 49ers fall to 1-3 after week 4, that is a reality that is absolutely possible. I know the Niners are, interestingly enough, favorites in this game against the Rams at home by a slim margin, which I think both of us are still trying to kind of figure out based on the first 3 weeks of this season.
It's interesting.
But what else is interesting is whether or not the 49ers are going to be in the danger zone if they fall to 1-3. Because right now, looking at the rest of the NFC, I could kind of make the argument that 1-3 does not put you out of it, but it certainly digs yourself a hole deep, similar to last year, not as late as a 3-5 after week 8, in which they continued on and still made the playoffs. But I think a lot of people forget that it came down to the final week, and it came down to a 17-point overtime win on the road at Los Angeles to get you into the playoffs. So they're kind of, obviously you'd love to be 2-2, but if they fall to 1-3, I could absolutely see the rest of this season needing to go nearly perfect just for them to get back into the playoffs, because looking ahead on their schedule, they do have a couple of winnable games against Atlanta. But then, you move down the line and there are some absolutely tough ones. So we'll see how the season unfolds. But for me, I'm dangerously close to putting them in the danger zone if they fall to 1-3 on Monday night.
So are you calling this week 4 game against the Rams a must win? Is that what you're saying, Evan?
It certainly feels that way, Mark. And not just because they've had the success that they've had against the Rams, obviously taking the last 6 regular season games, but because of how they looked, especially offensively. I mean, this Niners team has scored 5 touchdowns in 3 games against 3 teams that haven't honestly been all that impressive to this point. Who knows? By the end of the year, the Houston Texans or I'm not going to say the Seattle Seahawks, but the Denver Broncos could be one of the best teams in football. Who knows?
Seahawks.
I mean, I have no clue at this point. But it's just the fact that they have not been able to consistently put points on the board. I don't think that they've had so much an issue as far as sustaining drives. I mean, they did against Denver, especially in the second half. But if you take a look at the time of possession, average yards per play, like they've been all right. They just have not been able to drive the nail home and create points. And so that's why, depending on how this game goes and depending on how it looks, I would absolutely be willing to say this is a must-win game, or at least a must-show-me game, because you got to show me you can score before I'm willing to say that you can get to the playoffs.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously important. You don't want to be 1-3. You have games against the Chiefs, another one against the Rams looming before your bye in week 9. So you have a couple of more challenging games, but as you mentioned, you then get Carolina, Atlanta on the road. You're also playing the Chargers. You have 2 games against the Cardinals in the second half of the season. You're taking on Miami. You're taking on Tampa Bay. You're taking on New Orleans. None of those are gimmies. A couple of those, perhaps the Niners will be underdogs in those games. I mean, you have challenging games coming up, but it's only week 4. I'm not sure I'm ready to say, you lose on Monday night, ring the bell. This team is in imminent danger. They're not going to make the playoffs. There's just so much football left. And, you could say, and I said this last episode, they're not taking advantage. They haven't through 3 weeks of, perhaps the softest portion of their schedule. They should be 3-0. I think originally a lot of people had them 2-1 at this point because you expected more from the Denver Broncos, but realizing what they are, at least early in the season, most people changed that loss into a win, expecting the team to be 3-0 now at this point of the season. You're 1-2, so there's no denying it. 1-3 is not a good start, and it will be difficult. But I think it's still too early for me to say, yeah, you lose this game to the defending Super Bowl champs, a team you've played really well against in the last number of years. And suddenly, you're in the danger zone. You're not going to make the postseason. And I know you're not saying a definite you're out of the postseason, but I still think it's a little too early for me, especially when you consider the fact that this is a team that's now with their backup quarterback. And again, I know that Jimmy Garoppolo has been the starter in the past, but there's so many other variables going on in this team that there aren't among other teams. So I think it's all right, at least in my opinion, to give this team, another week or two, kind of see and see if they can figure things out before we rush to those judgments. But I will say a loss against the Rams on Monday night means that you have very little margin for error on other games because there aren't a lot of, gimmies left. You would like to think you should be able to beat Carolina and Atlanta both on the road, which is the last time that this team will play, outside of the Pacific Standard Zone, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, which is incredible. You want to get those 2 wins on the road, but there are going to be some challenges moving forward. So it decreases your margin for error significantly. You'd love to win a home game against a division opponent, but I would not yet be ready to say that this team is in absolute danger of missing the postseason.
No, but to me, the danger zone is the room for error or margin of error, as you put it. And that was kind of a theme throughout our first 2 episodes this week is like, how small is the room for error with this team? Because look, you're already looking at a couple of very impactful injuries outside of your starting quarterback and Trey Lance. You're looking at your starting running back. You're looking at your left tackle, who Kyle Shanahan said during his Thursday presser, they're hoping does not have to have surgery, but also left the opening on the table potentially for it. So Trent Williams has a high ankle sprain, is going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. And Colton McKivitz is going to be the guy that has to slot in. Look, he's, the 49ers offensive line, at least in the run, has been good. Yeah, Mark?
Quickly, Shanahan did say that Trent Williams won't need surgery. He didn't rule out that he could go on IR, but surgery is not going to happen, but potential for IR is still on the table. They hope not, but they're not sure.
Okay. So to clarify that, yeah, no surgery, at least from apparently something mixed in translation there. Regardless, a lot of impactful injuries for the 49ers that are going to hurt. And so you never know when those will continue to befall them. And to me, it's just like, look, you're at the point where if you go down 1-3, yeah, you absolutely got to beat Carolina. You absolutely got to beat Atlanta. You got to find a way to get back to 500. But if you lose another impactful player, we've already seen George Kittle miss 2 games. Who knows? I mean, Deebo Samuel missed injury for the majority of last season. His first couple of years in the NFL, that was not the case. Brandon Ayuk. I mean, there are a lot of things that can go wrong in any football game, as we saw last week against Denver. So for me, I don't think it's reasonable to expect injury, but you always have to be prepared for that. And the 49ers' depth right now, at least offensively, is lesser than I would like it, considering right now, again, you're 28th in points. Like, you have not been able to score the football. And so any more losses sustained on that side, to me, make the margin of error even more small. That's where I'm at as far as the danger zone definition is concerned for the 49ers.